The rain fell in a cold, relentless sheet, turning the industrial street into a slick mirror of despair. It was a part of the city Naima only ever saw from the tinted windows of her chauffeured car, a blur of warehouses and chain-link fences on the way to the airport. Tonight, she was in the heart of it, alone. Her own car, a sleek, silent electric beast, was dead on the side of the road, its futuristic dashboard as dark and lifeless as the sky. Her phone, of course, was also dead. A rookie mistake, the kind her executive assistant would have prevented. But she'd given her assistant the night off. She'd wanted to be alone. She had gotten her wish. A shiver, cold and sharp, ran through her. It had nothing to do with the damp chill that was beginning to seep through her tailored wool coat. It was fear. Pure, primal, and unfamiliar. Naima was the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar tech firm. She managed risk, she anticipated outcomes, she controlled narratives. Fear was a variable she had long ago engineered out of her life. Yet here it was, a tight knot in her chest, as the sound of footsteps echoed in the desolate quiet, slow and heavy. She pressed herself against the cold metal of her car, trying to shrink into the shadows. The footsteps grew closer. A figure emerged from the gloom, tall and broad-shouldered, silhouetted by the lone, flickering street lamp. Her heart hammered against her ribs. This was it. The cautionary tale every powerful woman is told. The price of independence. She squeezed her eyes shut, a silent prayer forming on her lips. The footsteps stopped. A voice, low and calm, cut through the sound of the rain. "You all right, ma'am?" Naima's eyes snapped open. The man stood a respectful distance away, his hands held slightly out from his sides, palms open. A gesture of peace. He wore a simple work uniform, the name of her own office building stitched over his chest. Kieran. Facilities. He was a black man, his dark brown skin glistening with rain. He looked tired, but his eyes held no malice, only a quiet concern. He was just a man, going home from work. Relief washed over her so intensely it made her dizzy. She couldn't speak, only manage a shaky nod. "Car trouble?" he asked, his voice gentle. She nodded again, finding her voice. "It just stopped. Everything. And my phone is dead." The words sounded pathetic, fragile. He didn't mock her. He didn't lecture her. He just gave a slow, understanding nod. "That happens. The cold can drain these new batteries fast if they're not fully charged." He looked at her impractical heels sinking into the grimy asphalt, at the fine coat that offered little real warmth. "It's not safe for you to be out here. My apartment is just a couple blocks away. You can wait there. Use my phone to call for a car. It's warm, and it's dry." Her mind, trained to assess every offer for a hidden cost, went blank. There was no angle here, no leverage to be gained. It was just kindness. A simple, human offering in the middle of a cold, dark night. She looked at his face, at the exhaustion etched around his eyes, and the sincerity that lived within them. "Okay," she whispered, the word a puff of white in the frigid air. And from that moment, as she followed the quiet man down the rain-soaked street, everything in Naima's meticulously controlled life began to change. The next morning, the sun fought its way through the clouds, casting pale yellow stripes across the floor of Kieran's small, warm apartment. The air smelled of coffee and cinnamon. Kieran stood at the stove, a faded apron tied around his waist, flipping pancakes. His movements were efficient, practiced. This was a rhythm he knew by heart. "Are they ready yet, Daddy?" A small voice, bright and full of energy, came from the living room. Amara, his 6-year-old daughter, was sitting on the floor, surrounded by a universe of her own making. Her worn, stuffed bear, Cosmo, was propped against a stack of books about planets, and she was carefully coloring a new drawing with a fistful of crayons. Her natural hair, styled in beautiful twists with colorful beads at the ends, clicked softly as she tilted her head to get the angle of a spiral galaxy just right. "Almost, sweet pea," Kieran called back. He slid a stack of pancakes onto a plate adding one slightly burnt one to the top with a small smile. Amara insisted the crispy ones were the best. He carried the plate to the small wooden table, a relic from his own childhood, its surface covered in the faint scratches and crayon marks of a life well lived. Amara scrambled to her seat, her bare feet pattering against the worn floorboards. "Is that a crispy one for me?" she asked, her eyes wide and hopeful. "The crispiest," he confirmed, setting the plate down. He watched as she carefully selected the burnt pancake, doused it in a river of syrup, and took a massive bite, a smear of sweetness appearing on her cheek. The sight filled the hollow space in his chest. For a moment, just a moment, it was almost enough. He sat down across from her, sipping his coffee. His life had been split in two 5 years ago. The death of his wife, Lena, had been a sudden, brutal amputation. For months, he had simply functioned, a ghost in his own life, his only anchor the tiny, demanding presence of his infant daughter. He'd moved from their spacious suburban house, the one Lena had filled with light and laughter, to this small apartment in the city, closer to his job. It was all he could afford, and all he had the energy to maintain. He left a promising career in architectural design to take a stable, less demanding job as a facilities manager. It paid the bills. It allowed him to be home every night to put Amara to bed. That was all that mattered. "Daddy," Amara said through a mouthful of pancake. "Mama used to make star pancakes." Kieran smiled, a genuine, warm expression that reached his tired eyes. "She did. She had a special cookie cutter." He could see Lena now, her deep brown skin glowing in the morning light, her laugh echoing in this very kitchen as she presented a plate of lopsided, five-pointed stars. The memory was a sweet ache. "I'm not as good as Mama was." "It's okay," Amara said, her voice full of a child's solemn wisdom. She reached across the table and patted his hand. "Your circle ones are good too." He squeezed her small fingers. She was his universe, his sun, his moon, his entire galaxy. He had built his world around her, a fortress of routine and quiet love, designed to keep them both safe. He never asked for anything. He never expected more than what he had. It was enough. It had to be. He thought of the woman from last night, the one with the frightened eyes and the expensive coat. He'd called a car for her, given her a cup of ginger tea while she waited, and sent her on her way. He hadn't even caught her name. She was from a different world, a planet he would never visit. A brief, strange intersection of orbits, nothing more. He put her out of his mind and focused on his daughter, on the syrup on her chin and the light in her eyes. High above the city, in a corner office with floor-to-ceiling glass walls, Naima stared at the skyline. The view was breathtaking, a sprawling map of power and ambition. It was a view she had earned. It was a view that had cost her everything else. Her desk was a vast expanse of polished black marble, holding nothing but a sleek laptop and a single, perfect white orchid. The silence in the room was absolute, insulated, a testament to her status. She had just finished a brutal 2-hour video conference with the European board, dissecting quarterly earnings with surgical precision. She had been commanding, incisive, flawless. No one on that call would have guessed that just 12 hours earlier, she had been trembling in the rain, a pathetic cliché of a damsel in distress. She picked at the gourmet salad her assistant had placed on her desk, the vibrant greens and exotic vegetables tasting like nothing at all. She felt a profound sense of dislocation. The woman in the expensive suit, the one who could make or break a company with a single phone call, felt like a stranger. The realest she had felt in years was sitting in a cramped, cluttered kitchen, a warm mug of tea in her hands, listening to the soft murmur of a father reading a bedtime story to his child in the next room. The man, Kieran. He hadn't been impressed by her. He hadn't been intimidated. He had simply seen a person in trouble and offered help. He had wrapped a thick, worn blanket around her shoulders, a blanket that smelled faintly of laundry soap and a child's shampoo. When the car arrived, he'd walked her out, holding an umbrella over her head, and simply said, "Get home safe." He hadn't asked for her number, for a reward, for anything. The memory of it made her throat tighten. It had been years since anyone had shown her kindness without an agenda. Growing up with parents who measured love in report cards and achievements, and then moving through a corporate world where every relationship was transactional, she had forgotten what simple, uncalculated decency felt like. It had undone her. Sitting in the back of the luxury sedan, wrapped in his blanket, she had cried. Quiet, shuddering sobs for a loss she couldn't even name. She pushed the salad away. She couldn't stay here today. She couldn't pretend to be the unshakable queen in her glass castle. The memory of that small, warm apartment was a magnet, pulling her out of her own sterile life. She had to see him again. Not to repay him. That felt cheap, insulting. She needed to understand. She needed to feel that sense of solid, unpretentious reality again. It was a craving, sharp and desperate, for something genuine. She stood up, grabbed her purse, and walked out of the office, leaving the billion-dollar view behind without a second glance. Kieran was in the building's cavernous basement, wrestling with a stubborn valve on a water main, when he heard the click of heels on the concrete floor. He looked up, wiping sweat from his brow with the back of his hand. It was her, the woman from last night. In the harsh, fluorescent light of the basement, she looked even more out of place, a bird of paradise in a cage of pipes and ductwork. "Ma'am," he said, surprised. He stood up, suddenly conscious of the grease on his hands and the sweat staining his uniform. "Is everything okay?" "Yes, fine," Naima said, her voice a little too bright. I just wanted to thank you again for last night." She was holding a thick, cream-colored envelope. "This is for your trouble." Kieran looked at the envelope, then back at her face. He didn't reach for it. "There was no trouble," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "I was glad I could help. You don't owe me anything." A flush crept up Naima's neck. Of course he would refuse. It was a clumsy, corporate gesture, an attempt to balance a ledger that wasn't monetary. "I know, but I'd like to." He just shook his head slightly, a gesture of polite refusal that was somehow more powerful than a shouted argument. "It's okay, really." An awkward silence hung between them. Naima felt her carefully constructed composure begin to fray. She was used to people wanting things from her. His refusal was disarming. She had to find another way, a way to stay in the orbit of this quiet, steady man, if only for a little while longer. An idea, wild and impulsive, sparked in her mind. It was a long shot, a deviation from every logical plan she had ever made. "I have a house," she blurted out. "My grandmother's house. It's been empty for years. It's falling apart. I need someone to do some repairs, plastering, painting, some light carpentry. I'd pay you well. As a private contractor, on your own time." Kieran looked at her, his expression unreadable. He was a facilities manager, not a handyman for hire. It was an odd request. "Why me?" "Because," Naima said, the truth surprising her as it left her lips. "I trust you." The words hung in the air, simple and profound. Trust was not a word Naima used lightly. It was a currency more valuable than money. Kieran saw the vulnerability in her eyes, the plea beneath the businesslike proposition. He thought of Amara, of the new shoes she needed, of the art classes she dreamed of taking. The money would change things for them. But more than that, there was something in this elegant, guarded woman's face that reminded him of a lost child. "I have to be able to bring my daughter with me after school," he said, setting his one condition. Naima's face broke into a smile, a real one this time. It was like the sun breaking through clouds. "Of course," she said. "I'd like that." The house stood on a quiet, tree-lined street in a historically black neighborhood on the west side of the city. It was a handsome old craftsman, but time had been unkind. Paint peeled from the siding like sunburnt skin, and the porch sagged with a weary sigh. For Naima, it was a house of ghosts. It was the only place she had ever felt unconditionally loved, in the arms of the grandmother who had raised her while her parents jetted around the world building their empire. After her grandmother's death, she hadn't been able to bring herself to sell it, but she couldn't bear to visit it either. Kieran's truck, a beat-up but reliable Ford, looked right at home parked in the driveway. He walked through the rooms, his expert eyes assessing the damage. He saw good bones, solid foundations. He saw potential. Naima saw only dust and memories and loss. Then Amara arrived. She burst through the front door like a tiny, joyful whirlwind, her backpack bouncing, her beaded braids clicking. She took one look at the dusty, empty living room, and her face lit up. "It's a castle!" she declared, her voice echoing in the stillness. She immediately found a sunbeam on the floor, unzipped her backpack, and began to set up her coloring station. Her bright, fearless energy instantly changed the atmosphere of the house, chasing away some of the shadows. Naima watched her, a strange warmth spreading through her chest. The days that followed fell into a new, gentle rhythm. Kieran worked with a quiet, focused competence that Naima found mesmerizing. He patched the crumbling plaster in the dining room, his dark hands moving with a surgeon's precision. He replaced a broken window pane in the kitchen, and suddenly the room was flooded with afternoon light. He didn't just fix things, he healed them. Naima found excuses to be there. She told herself she was supervising, but she knew she was hiding. Hiding from her sterile apartment, her demanding job, her echoing loneliness. She would sit in a dusty armchair, her laptop open but forgotten, and just watch him work. She'd watch Amara, who chattered away, providing a constant stream of commentary about her drawings of aliens and friendly black holes. One afternoon, Naima tried to contribute. She brought them lunch, expensive artisanal sandwiches from a deli downtown. Kieran and Amara ate them politely, but Amara whispered to her father, loud enough for Naima to hear, "It doesn't have enough cheese, Daddy." The next day, mortified and determined, Naima tried to cook in the old kitchen. She decided on pancakes, a tribute to the breakfast she'd overheard them sharing. It was a disaster. The batter was lumpy, the pan was too hot. She produced a series of blackened, smoking discs that looked more like charcoal briquettes. She was about to throw the whole mess in the trash, tears of frustration stinging her eyes, when Kieran came in. He didn't laugh at her. He just gently took the spatula from her hand. "You're holding your wrist too stiff," he said, his voice soft. He stood behind her, his hand covering hers, guiding her through the motion of pouring and flipping. His body was warm and solid behind her, a grounding presence. The air was thick with the smell of burnt batter and something else, something warm and electric. Together they produced one perfect, golden brown pancake. Amara declared it the best pancake in the history of the world. As the three of them sat at the dusty kitchen table, sharing that single pancake, Naima laughed. A real, uninhibited laugh that came from her belly. She couldn't remember the last time she had laughed like that. In that moment, surrounded by dust and imperfection, eating a single, shared pancake, she felt more at home than she ever had in her gleaming penthouse. A few days later, the slow burn bonding deepened. Amara, who had been watching Naima with her perceptive eyes, walked over and solemnly handed her a piece of paper. It was a drawing. 3 stick figures stood under a sky filled with meticulously drawn 5-pointed stars. One figure was tall with short hair. One was small with beaded braids. The third, standing between them, was a woman in a bright yellow dress with what looked like a crown on her head. The figures were all colored with a brown crayon, a tall black man, a little black girl, and a black woman. "That's you," Amara said, pointing a small finger at the crowned figure. "You're the queen of the Star House." Naima stared at the drawing, at the simple, profound image of belonging. A child had drawn her into their family, had colored her skin the same shade as theirs, had given her a crown. It was the most beautiful gift she had ever received. She felt that familiar tightening in her throat, but this time, she didn't fight it. She just whispered, "Thank you, Amara. It's the most beautiful drawing I've ever seen." The emotional walls she had spent a lifetime building were crumbling, brick by dusty brick. One evening, as the sun began to set, casting long golden rays through the newly cleaned windows, Kieran finished repairing the old porch swing. He tested it, then motioned for Naima to join him. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sky turn from orange to violet. "My grandmother and I used to sit out here every evening," Naima said, her voice soft. "She'd tell me stories. She was the only person, the only one who didn't care what my grades were or what I was going to be. She just loved me. She looked out at the garden, now mostly weeds. I haven't been able to come back here since she passed. It hurt too much. Kieran didn't offer platitudes. He just listened, giving her the gift of his quiet presence. His stillness made space for her grief. After a long moment, he spoke. "My wife, Lena," he began, his voice a low murmur. "She loved to garden. She would have loved this yard. She could make anything grow." He looked at his hands, calloused and strong. When she got sick, it was fast. One day she was planning what to plant for the spring, and the next, she was gone. He swallowed hard. Amara has her eyes. Every time she looks at me, I see Lena. It's a blessing, and it's a wound that never quite heals. He had never spoken of this to anyone, not with such raw honesty. But with Naima, here on this porch, it felt safe. They were two lonely people from different worlds who had found a common language in their shared history of loss. They sat together as darkness fell, the silence between them no longer awkward, but full and deep and resonant, a quiet promise that neither of them was completely alone anymore. The shift in Naima was subtle at first, then undeniable. The severe, elegant updos were replaced by softer styles, letting her natural hair frame her face. The sharp, tailored suits were sometimes swapped for soft sweaters and comfortable trousers. There was a new light in her eyes, a warmth that her colleagues had never seen before. She was still brilliant, still a formidable CEO, but the icy edge was gone, replaced by a grounded, more compassionate authority. She was delegating more, empowering her team, leaving the office at a reasonable hour. She was spending those hours at the old house, which was slowly transforming. The walls were painted a warm cream, the floors were polished to a soft glow, and the garden was slowly being cleared of weeds. It was becoming a home, their home. But such a transformation does not go unnoticed in the cold, transactional world Naima inhabited. Arthur Sterling, a veteran board member who had long coveted the CEO position, saw her newfound happiness not as a sign of health, but as a fatal weakness. He saw her distraction, her divided attention, as his opportunity. He was a petty man, fueled by jealousy and a sense of entitlement. He hired a private investigator. The photos that landed on his desk were more potent than any financial report. Naima, on her knees in the dirt, laughing as Amara placed a daisy in her hair. Naima, sharing a simple meal with Kieran on the porch steps, their shoulders almost touching. Naima, her face soft and unguarded, watching Kieran teach his daughter how to properly hold a hammer. To Sterling, the images were damning. The powerful, untouchable Naima, fraternizing with a blue-collar worker from one of her own buildings. Wasting company time on a domestic fantasy. He saw an angle, a narrative he could spin. He saw a coup. He called a private, informal meeting with a few key board members, old guard allies who were already unsettled by Naima's new, less aggressive leadership style. He laid the photos out on the polished table. "This is our CEO," Sterling said, his voice laced with false concern. "She's distracted, emotionally compromised. Her judgment is clouded." He tapped a photo of Naima and Kieran. "This man is a facility manager in the Apex Tower, an employee. The ethical lines are, at best, blurred. At worst, this is a catastrophic lapse in professionalism that exposes us to liability." He let the implication hang in the air. He didn't need to say the words affair or scandal. The pictures, stripped of their innocent context, did the work for him. He painted a picture of a leader who had lost her focus, her ambition, her killer instinct. He suggested her recent decisions to invest in employee wellness programs and community outreach were not sound business strategy, but sentimental follies influenced by her new association. "She's losing control," Sterling concluded, his face a mask of solemn gravity. "For the good of the company, we need to act. I am formally calling for a vote of no confidence at the board meeting on Friday." The seeds of doubt were planted. The world Naima was trying to leave behind was closing in, ready to pull her back down into its cold, airless depths. The fragile, beautiful thing she was building with Kieran and Amara was under threat. Friday arrived with a cold, steely gray sky. The boardroom at Apex Tower was silent, the air thick with tension. The long, obsidian table reflected the grim faces of the board members. Naima sat at the head of the table, not in her usual position of power, but as if she were on trial. Sterling, smelling victory, began his presentation. He spoke of shareholder value, of market perception, of the need for unwavering leadership. He was careful, his language coded and corporate, but his message was clear. Then the photos appeared on the large screen at the front of the room. Naima laughing in the garden. Naima sitting on the porch with Kieran. A collective quiet gasp went through the room. Naima didn't flinch. She looked at the images, at the captured moments of pure, simple joy, and felt not shame, but a profound sense of peace. That was her real life. This room, this power struggle, was the illusion. When Sterling finished, all eyes turned to her. They expected a defense, a denial, a counterattack. They expected the old Naima, the ruthless tactician, to tear Sterling's argument to shreds. Instead, she stood up slowly, her movements calm and deliberate. She wore a simple, elegant navy dress, no armor-like blazer, no intimidating jewelry. She looked at the faces around the table, men and women she had worked with for over a decade. "Thank you, Arthur," she began, her voice even and clear. "You are right. I have been distracted." Sterling allowed himself a small, triumphant smirk. "For the past 15 years, Naima continued, her gaze sweeping the room, I have been singularly focused on this company. I have sacrificed my time, my health, and my personal life to grow our bottom line. I have lived on conference calls and financial reports. And I was very, very good at it. We all were. We built an empire of glass and steel." She paused, letting her words sink in. "But a few weeks ago, my car broke down. A simple, inconvenient, human problem. And a man, a good and decent man, helped me. He didn't ask who I was. He didn't ask what I could do for him. He simply saw a person who needed help, and he helped. He and his daughter, they reminded me of something I had forgotten." Her voice grew stronger, filled with a conviction that had nothing to do with stock prices. "They reminded me that value is not just measured in quarterly earnings. It's measured in kindness, in laughter, in the time it takes to teach a child how to hold a hammer or to sit on a porch and watch the sunset. It's measured in human connection." She looked directly at Sterling, whose smirk had vanished. "You show these pictures as evidence of my weakness. I see them as evidence of my strength. The strength to finally choose an authentic life. The courage to be a person, not just a title." She took a deep breath. "You are right to call for a vote of no confidence. Because I no longer have confidence in a world where these moments," she gestured to the screen, "are considered a liability. I will not apologize for them. In fact, I choose them. I choose a life where a child's drawing is more valuable than a stock certificate. I choose a life where my worth is not determined by my title, but by the love I give and receive." She looked around the silent room one last time. "Therefore, to make your decision easier, I hereby tender my resignation as CEO of Apex Industries, effective immediately." She turned, and with a quiet dignity that filled the room, she walked out, leaving a board of stunned executives and the ruins of her old life behind her. She didn't look back. Naima didn't go to her penthouse. She didn't call her lawyer. She drove, her hands steady on the wheel, directly to the old house. The late afternoon sun was warm on her face, and for the first time in as long as she could remember, she felt completely, utterly free. Kieran was in the front yard, packing his tools into the back of his truck. He was whistling softly, a tune she didn't recognize. He looked up as her car pulled into the driveway, a smile of welcome on his face. But the smile faded as he saw her expression. He walked over as she got out of the car. He didn't ask what was wrong. He didn't need to. He saw the storm and the calm that followed it in her eyes. He simply opened his arms. Naima walked into his embrace and let out a breath she felt like she'd been holding for 20 years. He held her, his hand gently stroking her hair, his presence a solid, comforting anchor in the swirling sea of her emotions. He didn't offer solutions or platitudes. He just held her, and it was enough. Later, after the sun had set, they sat in the now cozy living room. Amara was curled up on the new sofa between them, sleepy after a simple dinner of grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup. The house was filled with the scent of fresh paint and old wood, and the quiet hum of a family settling in for the night. "I'll put her to bed," Naima offered softly. Kieran nodded, his eyes full of a deep, unspoken gratitude. He watched as she gently scooped the sleeping child into her arms. Before they went upstairs, he retrieved the old baby monitor they sometimes used when Amara napped in a different room. It was a cheap, crackly thing, but it worked. He set the receiver on the mantelpiece and went about tidying the living room, gathering stray crayons and putting away books. He could hear the faint murmur of Naima's voice from the speaker, a soft, soothing lullaby. Then, silence. He assumed she was tiptoeing out of the room. He was about to turn the monitor off when he heard a soft sigh, followed by a whisper. Her voice was thick with an emotion so raw, so vulnerable, it made him freeze, his hand hovering over a dusty rag. She was talking to herself, or perhaps to the quiet, listening spirit of the house. "Oh, Lena," she whispered, and Kieran's heart stopped. She was speaking to his late wife. "He loved you so much. I see it every single time he looks at your daughter. I see it in the way he still talks about you." A shaky breath crackled through the speaker. "I could never replace you. I wouldn't even try. But God, I want to protect them. I want to love them for you. For me." There was another long pause, and then one final aching whisper that shattered Kieran's world in the most beautiful way imaginable. "I think I'm falling in love with your husband, and I love your little girl as if she were my own. I hope that's okay." Kieran stood frozen in the middle of the living room, the dust rag clutched in his hand. The words she'd whispered, not meant for him, not a confession to him, but a sacred private prayer, had laid her soul bare. It wasn't a declaration of possession, but a promise of protection. It was a vow to the past, a plea for a future. In that moment, he didn't just see the powerful CEO or the kind woman he had grown to care for. He saw the person she was, in all her strength and all her vulnerability. And he knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that his life and his heart would never be the same. 3 months later, the old house was no longer a house. It was a home, vibrant and alive. Sunlight streamed through the clear, sparkling windows, illuminating the joyful chaos of family life. Amara's drawings were taped to the refrigerator, a gallery of smiling brown-skinned figures and swirling galaxies. The garden, once a tangle of weeds, was now a riot of color, with neat rows of vegetables and blooming flowers. Naima's resignation had sent shockwaves through the corporate world, but the board, faced with the stark reality of losing a leader of her caliber and shaken by the raw humanity of her speech, had done the unthinkable. They refused her resignation. In a stunning reversal, they ousted Sterling and asked Naima to stay, offering her a new contract with a mandate to build the company she had described, one that valued people as much as profits. She accepted on her own terms. She worked from the home office in her restored house 3 days a week, her priorities forever reordered. On a bright Saturday morning, Naima was on her knees in the garden, showing Amara how to tell a weed from a seedling. Kieran was on the porch, watching them, a soft smile on his face. The sight of them together, Naima's elegant hands covered in dirt, Amara's bright beaded hair catching the sun, was a masterpiece. Amara suddenly stood up, a serious expression on her face. She ran to the porch, where she had a small box of craft supplies. She returned a moment later, her hands behind her back. She walked up to Naima and presented her with a bracelet made of string and star-shaped plastic beads. "I made this for you," she said, her voice full of a child's solemn importance. It's for my new mama. Naima's breath caught in her throat. Her eyes immediately filled with tears. She looked from the simple, perfect bracelet to Amara's hopeful face. She knelt down so they were eye to eye. Is that a question, Sweet Pea? Naima asked, her voice a choked whisper. Amara nodded, her big brown eyes, Lena's eyes, searching Naima's. Are you going to be my mama forever? Naima's tears overflowed, tracing paths through the dirt on her cheeks. She looked over Amara's shoulder at Kieran, who was now kneeling beside them, his own eyes shining. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, his expression full of a love so profound it took her breath away. She turned back to the little girl who held her entire heart in her small hands. Yes, Naima whispered, the word a sacred vow. Yes, I am going to be your mama forever. She pulled Amara into a fierce hug, burying her face in the child's hair, breathing in the scent of sunshine and shampoo. Kieran wrapped his strong arms around both of them and closing them in a circle of love, creating a new family right there in the soil and the sun. Love, the universe reminds us, is not something you find in a boardroom or a bank account. It is not something you earn with achievements or accolades. Family is not always the one you are born into, but the one you bravely choose to build. It is built in the quiet moments, in a shared burnt pancake, in a whispered promise over a baby monitor, in the unconditional gift of a child's drawing. The greatest moments of our lives are often the smallest, the ones where we are not seen for what we have or what we do, but are finally, truly seen for who we are. And in that moment of being seen, we find our way home.